All right, and we're back to TingleCon 2021. We are here with our first live panel of the event. We are here with the ASMR Network and also Clow as well, Cloudnator. We are actually going to be talking today about the science of ASMR. There's so many questions. I just want to say also I apologize for this car alarm. Many ASMR artists can relate to me here, but just decides to go off right now. But today we're going to be talking about the science of ASMR, some of the current research, some of the past research, what are the conversations that are being had in the scientific community, and also maybe some ways that the people out there who want to support it maybe can help with some of this research, with donations and things like that. So why don't you three go ahead and introduce yourselves, tell people maybe your background in science and in research, and just kind of briefly what you're doing with ASMR.
I can go first. So my name's Julia. I'm a lecturer at the University of Essex in the UK. That basically means that I teach and do research. And one of the things that I'm interested in and have been interested in for a while now is doing research on ASMR. So I first started back in 2014. So it's been quite a long time now since I've been researching, but we found out some really, really interesting things. So hopefully I'll be doing lots more ASMR research in the future.
I'll go next. Hi everyone, I'm Rossi. I am a statistician actually for the UK government, and I am involved in ASMR through ASMR Net, or the ASMR Research Network, which I sort of set up with Julia and the Toms, I call them, Tom Hostler and Tom Swart. And I have a BSc in psychology and MSc in cognitive neuroscience, and my main trigger is chewing gum and magazine flipping. That's what I love. But yeah, as I say, more involved in ASMR as a side gig, if you like, in addition to the stats job. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Cloud Nader. I'm originally from Mexico, but I'm based in the UK at the moment. I'm a sound engineer, that's my background in. I am an MSc in post-production with sound design, so basically I'm a media producer. But I love science and technology and everything related to psychology and neuroscience. So basically now I'm doing a PhD. After a long time working in the industry, I'm doing some research on the sound element of ASMR inducing media. And I came up with the ASMR Research Net fairly recently, actually. And yeah, I'm really excited to be collaborating with some of them. And my biggest trigger. Okay, so in media, it's metal sponges. Oh my God. Yeah, and in real life, I don't know, some combinations of colors and just seeing like someone stroking a pet or giving a massage. So yeah, that's me.
Cool, cool. Welcome. So I actually have a question because I think we're going to jump into the science, I promise, but I think I'm asking all of the panels these two questions that I think, a lot of people are curious about. Just what's your first ASMR experience that you can remember? Or do you not experience ASMR?
I think we all experience ASMR. We're all tingleheads. For me, I can't pinpoint my exact first ASMR experience, but teachers at school would always be quite a strong one, and then also kind of hair play, and then also when you used to play the can you guess the finger on your back, and then I always used to pretend to get it wrong, the letter wrong, so that the person would have to do it again. So kind of loads of childhood triggers. Getting my feet measured for school shoes was a big one as well for me, and lice checks. But I think that they're quite common. Nothing out of the ordinary, I don't think.
Clark, do you want to go next? Or should
You
I go?
go.
No, should I go? Okay. My earliest one, I think, was in primary school. Was so when I was about 7. Julia knows the story, and we were in a class, and again, it was a female teacher I really liked, and she was reading a story, and I just felt my whole head tingle. And I was actually scared because I thought my hair was sticking up on end and I thought everyone was looking at me and could see me with this, it felt like a superpower. But I didn't know what it was until I was probably like 17, so a decade later. But yeah, that was my first ASMR experience.
Well, I can't remember like how old I was, but I've had it ever since I have memory. And I remember that my mom would be, or my sister would be tickling my back, and I would just feel it like my like in my head and my back, and I just thought everyone would experience that. So whenever someone said that they didn't like someone else tickling their back, I would be like, why? It's so good. And also like when I'm having a deep conversation ever since I was a kid, like just learning something very deeply or just something that makes me fascinated in a like in school or just listening to someone talking about something really really interesting, that gives me a lot of ASMR too. I just completely zone out and I start imagining like their whatever they are saying. So yeah.
Cool. That was really interesting. I think I love to hear those first time experiences, like, because sometimes they're very weird and fun. Which is like, that's, I think the first entry into ASMR, it's like, oh, wow, like, why do I feel this? This is weird. I like cereal. Someone eating cereal. Um, but of course it is totally normal. So that's the beauty of ASMR. So let's actually just then launch. Actually, I want to get into this because, again, we only have an hour, and I see already a bunch of questions here coming through. So I think a lot of this idea of this event is, of course, creating this sense of community, but we have so many, we have an educational panel and things like that. I think ASMR there's certain perceptions in the public, I think, about ASMR, and I think I'd like, let's hear what the science has to say. So somebody who might be a bit skeptical of ASMR, maybe they're just saying, it's just tapping, it's all in your head, it's not really real, it's, come on. What does science have to say to something like that?
So these guys can say something as well, but I mean, that was originally the reason why I started to do ASMR research, was because of the skepticism. So I thought about, well, what would it take to convince somebody who thinks that we're just making it up, that this is a real genuine experience. So we ended up doing a couple of research studies, which we published in a paper called More Than a Feeling, which shows that ASMR is not just something that people say that they experience, it's also something that is physiologically rooted. So we looked at more objective measures of what's going on in somebody's body when they're experiencing ASMR, and we connected that to them watching ASMR videos. So we've got some pretty good evidence now to suggest that ASMR isn't just something that people say they experience, their body is also telling us the same story as well. And, I know that people experience ASMR because I experience ASMR, but it's about, trying to convince people who, they don't understand it, that it's a genuine thing. And we now know that ASMR is consistently associated with things like reduced heart rate, which is consistent with this idea that ASMR is something that's relaxing. So I think that was a really good first piece of the puzzle in terms of, this is a genuine, reliable, physiologically rooted experience that hopefully we can all kind of accept as, a psychological and emotional and physiological experience that some people have and other people don't, but it's one that we can study with the tools of science.
I'll jump in as well and just add that if I met someone, I do meet people who are skeptical of ASMR and don't necessarily believe it's a real thing. I always tell them to have a Google, get on Google Scholar and just look at some of the papers that have been published since 2015, because it's still fairly in its infancy, but we're seeing papers all the time that are being published. And for me, the most convincing, well, not convincing, but I really like reading about brain studies of ASMR, which just show that it's becoming more and more clear that there is a unique neuroprofile of ASMR, and we can sort of see the picture of it in the brain. So even just this year, for example, there was a paper published where the first EEG study of ASMR, an EEG is basically if you don't know, it's electroencephalography, and it's when you put a funny light swimming cap on the head and you're looking for brain waves. And the paper this year showed that people who experience ASMR are more likely to have alpha waves, which is linked to sensory motor and attentional characteristics, and which might not mean a lot, but as I say, go have a Google and look at these papers and read it and see that this, the evidence isn't the right word, but supporting studies are popping up all the time that indicate that it is real. Believe us.
I quite come from like a very different background. So I guess I come from a media point of view because I didn't even know about ASMR inducing videos until a friend of mine pointed me out, like to this kind of media. So I just thought everyone experienced tingles and like this kind of experience. So I started like watching the videos, and the skeptical person was me because most videos make me cringe. I experience misophonia actually. It's like very, very counted videos or type of media that trigger my ASMR. I experience ASMR more in real life. So I'm just a very curious creature, and I just wanted to know how we can help people with media because I believe in like I love science and I love technology, but I also know that there's way beyond that because we're humans and it's so complex. We're so complex, and sometimes we don't have an explanation. Sometimes we don't. We do for like experiences. So I think this is like a great opportunity to combine a lot of systems of thought, science, and other type of like systems of thought, just to have like an analytic point of view to understand and to support people in different ways than like the traditional ones that we know.
Awesome. So actually, let's go ahead and jump into some of that. Actually, Rosie, you did kind of mention what I wanted to talk about next, which is, I mean, what does the brain look like under ASMR?
Yeah, so Julia will probably be able to add in a bit here as well, because she's read like more ASMR papers than any human being, I think, on Earth, maybe. Well, at least that I know in my circles. But we know from some studies, for example, MRI studies, that there are certain regions that are activated, like the right cingulate gyrus, the right paracentral lobe, and bilateral thalamus, which might not mean a lot to a lot of people, but it basically means that we're seeing things like emotional networks being activated, and we're seeing reward networks being activated, and the brain is clearly aroused. And what we mean by the reward network is that the brain is basically responding in a similar way that it would to other rewarding experiences, like, for example, social interaction, or basically like when you're entertained by something. And as I say, there's still quite a lot of ASMR neuroimaging research to be done, but there are some really exciting papers out there. There's also a paper that was published, I want to reference this correctly, but it was by Smith and Cornelson, and they looked at functional connectivity in ASMR, so how related brain regions are, and they found that in response to different triggers, the brain responds in different ways depending on the trigger and is connected to different regions in different ways. So actually now what we're seeing in neuroimaging research is that we've been able to tease apart different triggers neurally and look at the unique profile in response to different triggers and how that looks in different people, which is interesting, I think. So it's up and coming, and there are already some papers out there like EEG and MRI, but there's more to come, I think. Julia, you probably got something to add as well, and Cloud, obviously.
I guess the only thing that I would add is a healthy dose of skepticism around the fMRI research. So a lot of the research that Rossi has spoken about is what we call resting state functional connectivity, which is about changes in how brain activity correlates. Certain parts of the brain correlate with other parts of the brain at rest. So quite a lot of the research isn't necessarily looking at what's happening when people experience ASMR. There is some, but it's based on really small sample sizes. So we're talking like 10 people. And from, sample sizes in neuroscience are quite small because it's very expensive. But we really do need quite a lot more research. And I think there is skepticism around whether you can experience ASMR in an fMRI scanner because they're so loud. I think it's shown to be possible, but we really need to start getting better at selecting people to go in the scanners who are really good at experiencing ASMR, maybe even people who can self-induce it. So I know that that's something that we haven't researched a lot, that we really need to research a lot more, is the self-induction of ASMR. You know, some people say that they can just induce it themselves without any external trigger, or not even through imagination, just through thinking about it. So yeah, I think the methods are limited, and I think what Rossi mentioned about the cap, that might be a better method for starting to look at ASMR, because it isn't so loud. One of the caveats of that is that I think, and these guys will probably relate in terms of research, is that when you do research, actually the whole experience of being in a research place is quite ASMR inducing. So we actually found, when we were doing our study that got published, that people reported really strong ASMR during the experimental setup rather than when watching the video. So when we were attaching the sensors to them, and when we were getting to fill out forms and answer surveys and things like that, you know, I used to take part in psychology experiments because they gave me ASMR, especially EEG ones, because somebody would be like playing with your hair and stuff. So it can be challenging to try and study ASMR in the lab, because you might inadvertently trigger it when you're testing people, which is no bad thing, but we might miss the ASMR moments.
And following up on what Julian mentioned about the sample size, we're so used to conducting research in very privileged regions. So it's also really, really important to create research and to create studies and adapt studies to different cultures and different regions, so we can observe in a more neutral way the experience that people live. Because we agree that there's people all over the world experiencing ASMR, but the research that we've developed so far is very westernized. So it's important to have that in mind and try and be more inclusive. So that's why it's so important to have more people on board from different places.
Absolutely, and I think that this actually leads into the next question here that I have for you, because this is probably something that's like something of interest to myself. But you know, is this more of a phenomenon that's rooted in a nature or nurture? I mean, I don't want to take sides here, because that's probably a mistake in itself, but just for the sake of argument, would you do see some of the research that implies, for example, that this might have relationships with grooming habits in primates? So that might be more of a nurture situation, or as you say, it does light up certain parts of the brain with certain triggers. So maybe that's more of a nature situation. So could you perhaps just talk about that for a few moments, and maybe with your opinion?
Does anybody else want to go first? I feel like I'm hogging.
I could go if you want. So I'll leave like the more neuroscience kind of thing to you guys, but I just wanted to mention that it's so broad and so complex, like human nature and our response to everything, to any type of stimuli. There might be some patterns, there might be some neurotypes as well. But for example, it's not the same someone that grew up in the city than someone that grew up in the countryside. So the neuroplasticity between two people that grew up in different places is super different. So their response to either sound or visuals or any type of stimuli will be very, very different in terms of how, in terms of affect, how they just respond physiologically and emotionally to stimuli. So yeah, you go, guys.
Sorry, I think I know this is a really boring answer, but I think with most things in science, if not all things in science and psychology, it's going to be a combination of nature and nurture. In terms of like, we don't have an ASMR gene, so we know that certain people in the population are more likely to experience ASMR. But I think there's probably some neuromarkers of individuals that are more likely to experience ASMR. So I think it's difficult to pinpoint it to either nature or nurture. But I know that Dr. Craig, I don't want to misquote him now, Dr. Craig Richard from ASMR University has some quite interesting views and theories about, I think that ASMR sort of originates from an evolutionary perspective, and that it's to do with looking at communication with hand signals, for example, and how people communicated pre-language. So, you know, it's maybe a plug for Dr. Craig's findings on research. You can have a look at what he has to say at ASMR University, but probably a combination of the two. That's what I would add.
Yeah, no, I mean, I tend to agree with Rossi, but I think probably the answer will lie somewhere in between. But what we need is more research to figure this out. So we need things like twin studies to look at, you know, what whether ASMR is, to what extent it's genetically inherited. And then what we crucially need, and this is a thing that I think would be really exciting, is developmental studies. So we need to look at how the brain develops and what leads one person to experience and develop this trend towards ASMR type experiences and not. So my own feeling is that it's about strengthening connections between different brain regions and development. So I think it's a developmental thing, which would suggest that it's probably more nurture than nature, if you want an answer either way. But I think we really need research, and actually that is going to be the most challenging stuff to do, is the developmental research. It's going to be the most challenging, the most expensive probably, and the hardest to get funding for. But I think that's what is really going to start to tell us the answers about why some people experience this and why some people don't.
So that was actually my next question. So that's perfect that you guys touched on that. And I really do appreciate that. I think that's just absolutely fascinating. So why don't we actually move into something again that we have kind of touched on again. And I think this is sort of another interesting thing. It might require a little bit of explanation about what these terms mean. But what is the relationship between ASMR and misophonia, which is the dislike of certain sounds? Frisson, music frisson, which is like the tingles you get when you listen to an amazing song or something like that. Feel very like kind of ethereal there. And then these are my non-scientific descriptions. You're welcome to fix them. And then synesthesia, which is like different parts of the brain interacting with each other. So do you want to talk about that maybe a little bit?
I mean, I could talk about this for hours, but I don't want to hog. Cloud, do you want to say something about misophonia, given that you experience it, maybe, and synesthesia?
Okay. Well, I guess I can tell more about the experience itself. I guess I'm a very empathetic person, and I think that has to do inevitably with the perception or the enhancement of responses towards stimuli. But also, I think it has to do with neurodiversity. I'm neurodivergent, so I don't know if that has to do with that I'm so sensitive. I'm sensory, very sensitive, and I have sensory overload, for example. So I might think that my experience of misophonia might have to do with that, but also PTSD, stuff like that. So I don't know if I'm like the best example to talk about misophonia, because there's so many factors involved in my affect, in the way my brain processes stuff. But yeah, I think empathy is clue in here.
So maybe I can say something about kind of the relation, what we know from the research that's out there. So we're conducting a systematic review at the moment, which is looking at kind of all the evidence out there, both published and unpublished, into all facets of ASMR. So we've dug through sort of so much literature. And misophonia does seem to be related to ASMR, in the sense that if you experience ASMR, you're more likely to experience misophonia. And if you experience misophonia, you're also more likely to experience ASMR. But it's not found in every study that looks at it. So there's quite a lot of studies that actually that don't find an association between misophonia and ASMR. So I don't think that having reviewed all the evidence, I don't know that it's really that strong. But there does seem to be something going on. And we've kind of suggested in a paper that is coming out soon, hopefully, that ASMR is associated with heightened sensory sensitivity, which is something that Clau also mentioned in terms of kind of sensory stimulation. So the paper is called The Awesome as Well as the Awful, which is kind of getting to this idea that sensory sensitivity isn't necessarily a bad thing, in that yes, you might be overwhelmed by sensory input, but it also enables you to experience things in a positive way. And that might be things like ASMR. It also might be things like complex emotions like frisson. We also know that ASMR and frisson are related in the same way that ASMR and misophonia are, in the sense that if you experience one, you're more likely to experience the other. I think frisson is more common than ASMR, and it's also quite often associated with activating activation in the body, whereas ASMR seems to be a bit more of a complex response in that it's associated with reduced heart rate but increased skin conductance, whereas music-induced chills tend to be associated with increased heart rate. So physiologically, their profiles seem to be quite different. I think neurologically, brain-wise, they look quite similar. But in the body, we think that they're a little bit different.
Just a question on that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but related, because I was just thinking about this. But in terms of neurotransmitters, is there some sort of effect from dopamine or serotonin in the response there? Is that?
It's a great question. There hasn't been any of that research yet. Hopefully it's coming. I've had a few people contact me and suggesting that we need to start looking at neurotransmitters. People are particularly interested in oxytocin as well, and the relationship to ASMR. But again, this is expensive research, and it's really hard to get funding for ASMR research at the moment. So hopefully that will change. But yeah, we need neurotransmitters. We need all of this more objective work. Rossi, do you want to add synesthesia stuff? Maybe I didn't.
I'm not sure too much about synesthesia, to be honest, but I think one thing just to point, I guess, about considering when you're looking at sort of musical frisson versus ASMR is that one thing that is a good way of sort of teasing them apart is that frisson's it's usually in response to music, and it's often quite short and snappy, whereas ASMR can often be quite prolonged. Some people experience ASMR for like over an hour, which I'm very envious of. So there's also some quite particular differences, I guess, in the experiences themselves and how they manifest and what they are in response to. Would be what I would add. But I think Claire has something to say about synesthesia.
Claire, you want to add something there? Yeah.
Yeah, just like from the sound engineering point of view, it's important to understand that sound, for example, if we're talking about sound stimuli, sound is vibration, so it's basically touch. It's a touch response that transforms into electricity into our brain. So how much is it sound perception itself, and how much is it the vibration perception itself, if you know what I mean? So there you get to a point where like senses merge, and we need to understand like the body response and the psychological response is a whole. We tend to divide the senses because that's how we understand things, and that's how we make sense of some things. But is it really synesthesia, or is it that just, like senses are actually more connected than we think, maybe?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, because I mean, Claire, we've spoken about this before in terms of, how much alike is a sound and touch as senses. And I think I've always kind of considered ASMR to be a form of synesthesia. So I've written about this in the past, in that it might be a form of sound touch synesthesia, because one of the key things about ASMR is that you can get a tactile sensation from auditory stimulus or from visual stimulus, or often the merging of the two. It seems to be a bit more distributed than that, and people often forget this because ASMR is so often in the online world now, but probably one of the most common ASMR triggers is touch. So it seems to me that what's going on is some kind of differential processing of tactile-like stimuli. And we are writing some research grants to try and understand these ideas, and the way in which senses might be integrated in the way that Claire is suggesting. So definitely, I think that synesthesia and using synesthesia as a model for trying to understand ASMR is really helpful, because there's a lot of research on synesthesia that we can draw on.
Awesome. That was really interesting. I have so many questions, but we only have an hour, so I want to just make sure I cut into the most important questions here. We really get into them. I think a lot of people are curious about this one here. It is a little bit of we're diverging here just a little bit, but Can you talk a little bit about what types of triggers are affect the physiology the most, or does science show that certain triggers are more effective than others?
Yeah, so we have some recent data on this, which isn't published yet, but we developed a new ASMR checklist to try and get at common and most intense triggers, and touch is up there. Whispering, tapping, soft speaking, and close personal attention seem to be the ones that are the most popular and also most triggering. We also know from some research that we've done that spoken versus sound only ASMR seems to produce a stronger effect. So with people, vocal sounds basically produce more of an effect than just sound only in general. That's not to say that people don't differ, because there are individual differences, but in general. Rossi, I don't know, do you want to say something about triggers and the brain and those specific things?
Well, yeah, I was going to sort of add about it's not so much a brain thing, although I do blabber on about the brain sometimes, but it's more about how, from our discussions with ASMR people in the ASMR community, that triggers. It's not really from a science point of view, but the sort of triggers that people like sort of ebb and flow, and there's different trends of ASMR triggers over the years, and there's different popularity depending on the season and the time. So I think what's important in science is that we respond to that, and we're constantly monitoring these things and what the top triggers are and what people are responding to. And we're also open-minded, so we don't get too, fixated on soft speaking. And but I guess because I'm a chewing gum person, that I'm a bit more biased, but I guess we just have to be open-minded as researchers to all sorts of different triggers, which is also, I guess, how we found out about touch, and that as well. That's everything from me, I think, on that one.
Did Cloud, did you want to add anything on that? Or I think we all kind of touched on that. Let's go to the next thing, because actually now I'm realizing we have a bunch of audience questions, and I want you to have a chance to talk about your research here. I was just kind of looking through my list here. What's the most important thing? So why don't we go into this, because I think this is a really important component. What's the relationship, in terms, scientifically at least, with mental health and ASMR? Is there a place for ASMR in mental health? Perhaps, I think you may have answered this on your Twitter thread, where you answered a million interesting questions related to this, but maybe there's a role in therapy and things like that. Could you touch on that, perhaps?
Cloud, do you want to say something? I know you're really passionate about this.
Yeah. Well, actually, I started in research because of mental health experiences, and like the need to offer some hope, or like some alternatives to people. So what it's been observed so far, which is very, very self-reported on social media, on virtual platforms, is that people use this for their own well-being. And the few studies that exist out there that have been published show some indicators that this could potentially be used in the same way that that people use meditation or mindfulness techniques. But I think it's like we're in a very early stage. If people are using it for their well-being, even if we have scientific evidence, or even if we don't, then it's working for them. So we need to listen to people, because they are the ones experiencing their own mental health. And also, I think it's important to know, for example, if there's like a standard, if there's a pattern, if there's like this specific trigger, if there's like this specific stimuli, or if we can actually personalize ASMR for people. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how we can tailor ASMR inducing media or triggers depending on people's needs. Yeah.
Did you, Julia or Rosie, did you want to touch on that at all?
Julia, I know you're quite interested in sort of the role of ASMR in terms of social connectedness, perhaps, and how that could maybe sort of act as a bit of a replacement in some instances, particularly obviously with COVID and the 38 lockdowns we've had in the UK, sort of how, I'm being a bit dramatic with 38, but how it can sort of be used, and how people have turned to ASMR, I guess, in recent times, which have been a bit more difficult. Julian put you on the spot there a bit, I think, but
No, I'm really happy to talk about it. I mean, I see lots of potential, and I think it's really clear to see that ASMR is helping so many people around the world. So I don't think that that's in doubt in terms of whether it can be helpful for people's individual mental health, as Klaus said. But what I'm interested in as a researcher is, what is the science behind it? Does it work? And if so, how does it work? So, there are lots of potential mechanisms to well-being that we don't yet understand. So Rossi mentioned one, which is this idea that you might somehow be able to get a sense of connectedness with other people through ASMR that you can't get in real life. Another thing that I'm particularly interested as somebody who studies sleep as well is, how does ASMR help sleep if it does indeed help sleep? So a lot of people use ASMR to help with insomnia, but we don't really actually know whether it is helping them to sleep. Does it actually improve the quality of their sleep, or does it just help them get off to sleep quicker? Why is it working? And I think for me, those are the really interesting questions is, what are the mechanisms through which ASMR can enhance well-being? And, how does it work? And also, can we personalize it? So how can we make it better? And until we understand how these things work, we can't improve them necessarily. That's my view anyway.
Awesome. Okay, so I actually am going to ask one more question, and I think this is part of the audience questions. And then we'll get into the other audience questions, and we'll talk about your research at the end, because we have about 20 minutes, so 25 minutes left. So what is tingle immunity from a scientific perspective? Is it a real thing, or?
Does anybody else want to answer? I don't want to. I'm happy to go ahead and say what I think about it. So it's really interesting, and there hasn't been. I think there's one study on tingle immunity that was done by Safia Mank, who's now at Manchester University doing a PhD on behaviour change in COVID. But she did her undergraduate dissertation on tingle immunity. Just evidencing that it's a real thing and how to overcome it. So there is some really limited research, but essentially what I think tingle immunity is overexposure and habituation. And this is one of the really difficult things about recommending ASMR as a form of therapy, because it isn't like you can just increase ASMR and then increase the well-being that you're getting or the benefits. What seems to happen is, paradoxically, the more you get into it, the less you can experience it, and that can be so frustrating. And it's kind of an ironic effect. So in psychology, we talk about ironic processes. Like there's this thing which you say, don't think about a white bear, and then of course automatically everyone thinks about a white bear. And I think the same can be said for ASMR. Like when you really want to experience it and get into experiencing ASMR can be really difficult. So I think one of the best ways to kind of get over ASMR immunity is to have a break and to not expose yourself, and also to look at different triggers. So this is one of the most amazing things that I've seen online and from ASMR creators is the amazing creativity in the kinds of things that are triggering, things that I watch that I'm like, I never thought that was a trigger for me. And then I see an ASMR artist do this and I'm like, wow. And that can really help get over habitual triggers that lead to immunity.
I think something else that I think it's worth mentioning is the expectancy. So there's been some studies that show that the ASMR experience is linked to expectancy. So when you don't know what's coming up next, you get a bigger response than if you knew what to expect. And this translates to any kind of response, really. There's a theater author called Stanislavski. So Stanislavski talked about how actors need to keep refreshing their triggers to experience or like how to induce their emotions, because the stimulus it wears off. So it's part of what Julia is saying about habituating to the stimulus and overexposure. So it happens with any type of stimulus. So yeah, it's just about discovering what, like, all the possible triggers out there, as Julia says.
And I think just to add to what Clara was saying about expectation, and I think that's why so much ASMR content out there is sort of about mimicking natural situations where almost you kind of want to believe that they're not trying to sort of instigate ASMR or induce ASMR. Because some people, I'm not, one of these people, but some people, if they can tell that the ASMR content creator, the person who's doing the ASMR, wants you to experience ASMR, then it doesn't work, which is a bit of a paradox, and it can be a bit frustrating, but that's just kind of what I wanted to add.
Okay, fantastic. So let's jump into your research, actually, because I think that's really important. And then Carol, if you could jump in with the audience questions after this, because I think there's a bunch there. Maybe we've answered one or two. So what kind of things are you studying or looking at when you're investigating ASMR?
So I mean, loads of stuff. I don't want to talk too much in detail because I could just go on for hours, but we're really interested in differences in sensory sensitivity in ASMR. I'm doing a project looking at ASMR and misophonia in relation to background noise, for example. We had a load of lab studies involving EEG, physiology, and loads of different things that had to stop because of the pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to getting those back up and running. We're going to have a full scale everything. So that'll be really exciting. And then one of the things that we're doing with the ASMR Research Network is we're trying to come up with a research agenda that isn't just dictated by, what I want to study as a psychologist or what Clara wants to study as a sound engineer. So one thing that we're really interested in is getting a kind of consensus or more collaborative view about what ASMR research should look like in the future. So we all have our own individual differences in terms of what we want to research, but we're really interested in coming up with that in a collaborative way. So involving people from the ASMR community, ASMR artists, content creators, researchers from lots of different fields. So if anybody is interested in contributing to that, research process of coming up with an agenda for the future of ASMR research, please get in contact with us through the network, and we'd love to hear from you. So we're interested in making it more collaborative as well.
Rossi or Claude, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think just adding to what, I know I'm biased because I'm part of like ASMR Net, the ASMR Research Network, but I think why we're so keen to include the ASMR community is that I think ASMR is quite a personal experience. And we really do want the studies and what we know about ASMR to reflect what people want to find out and to our actual experiences. And there's not really much use in having the research out there and the findings out there if it's not sort of done in parallel with outreach in the community, I believe personally. And it's just so enriching as well, just not getting into a scientific bubble of researchers. I love researchers, they're a great breed of people, but they're not the only people out there, and they certainly don't reflect, as Claire was saying, they certainly don't reflect often the general population, massively. But yeah, that's what I would add.
Yeah, well, obviously I'm biased because I'm a soundie, right? So I want to know everything about the sound element of the ASMR experience and ASMR inducing media. So I'm particularly interested in how the immersiveness of sound in this type of videos have to do with the ASMR experience. So currently I'm for my PhD research, which is a very small study in terms of, like the research and academic life. I'm studying the differences between binaural, stereo, and mono sound formats, and what is really binaural, what is really stereo, because sometimes people say that they are using binaural sound and it's not really binaural, so there's like a little bit of misinformation over there. And just I'm targeting my study, for example, for adolescents, so I guess it's about like finding some intersectionality and finding like common grounds, and as Julia and Rosa say, just like combining the experience not only of scientists from different fields, but the population, and because at the end of the day, people are who are experiencing this, and this is for people out there. So yeah, science is fun. but really we need people to live this and to show the results for science to work, really.
So it sounds like I was going to say talk about your current research. So it sounds like you're kind of talking, but was there anything you wanted to add in terms of just what you're currently working on? I know you said there's some things you're looking at, but maybe some papers people can go reference or read about if they're really interested. Is there anything you wanted to say? And then also to add to this, where do you see the future of ASMR research going? And I know that we've touched on that just a little bit, but.
Julia is like the systematic review guru here, so.
I mean, when our systematic review gets published, that will probably be the best place to go to read everything that's ever been published, including things that are unpublished. I'd say a really good place to start if people are interested in looking at research studies is ASMR University website. Craig Richard has done an amazing job over a really long time of promoting ASMR research, the science and art of ASMR. So that's a great place to start. Google Scholar. If you find a paper that you can't access, email me and I'll send it to you, because I know that sometimes can be problematic for people to access. I'm allowed to send papers, I think. The internet is a great place to search. The publication can be really slow. That's the only thing, is that, for example, our paper that got published in 2018, we did the research in 2014, and it took a really long time to get published because it kept getting knocked back because people were like, what is this thing? There's no research on it. At that time, when I started researching it, there was nothing published on it. So it's that kind of, and I think that's changing now. And as Rossi said, there's loads of stuff coming out now, but it does take a while. So the stuff that you're reading now was probably done like 3-4 years ago.
Can I also plug, Julia, correct me if I'm wrong with this, but Tom S from ASMRnet, a member of our team, is hot off the press with his paper, which is essentially, I think, a standardized measure of ASMR, which we can use in future research, which I think is so important, because we need to make sure that going forward, and it sort of links to what you're asking, Nathan, about the future of ASMR research. Going forward, we need to make sure that ASMR studies are actually capturing ASMR and that it's not related phenomena. So go have a look at Tom's paper and I guess have a look at the questions or the measure that's used and see if you think that that's picking up on ASMR, which I think it is. Hopefully it is, but that's something I always plug.
Cool. So actually, this is an important question, and then we'll jump into this audience questions here. But how can the audience out there support your research, or your organizations? What can people do if they want to help out?
I guess follow the ASMRnet on social media and sign up to their mailing list, because it's an important group of scientists and artists and other people working together. So it's already formed. So if there's other ASMR research networks across the pond, it would be so cool to just get together and collaborating in this. But it's, I don't know, just follow them on social media, because it's like a hub. So everything that happens on ASMR, the ASMRnet is up to date and spreading the word about it.
Can I add as well? Also, by the way, sorry, it's getting darker and darker in this room, so I'm going to disappear at some point. I'm sorry, I have put a light on, but it's so dark in here, so let me know if you can't see me, unless you don't want to. One thing I was going to add is that one way you can support ASMR research is by being a participant. If you see ASMR studies that are recruiting and you experience ASMR, and if you have the time, often these things pay. I think it's really important to participate, so that the studies reflect people who actually experience ASMR, because we are sometimes few and far between in some populations, some samples. So participate in ASMR research. And one thing we want to do with ASMRnet is set up a website where we can sort of host these different ASMR studies and people can participate online. So it's a bit of a sneak preview of one feature that we want to incorporate.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add to that is that at some point, hopefully for the ASMR Net, we're going to have a donate page. ASMR Net only exists because people helped us get there. So people donated money, we crowdfunded for it. So this was an idea that we tried to apply for proper research funding for, and failed because, again, people were like, what is this? So we decided that we would crowdfund it. And we were really lucky that, quite a lot of people kindly donated, and we had some really generous donators as well from the ASMR community. And I think a lot of people were quite skeptical of it because we were kind of asking for money, and they were not sure about whether it was genuine, and that's completely understandable. And that, that means that we need to work harder to connect with the ASMR community. But at some point, we will be putting a donate thing on there. It would help keep the website running. And things like that, but there's no obligation to. We just want to hear from people and connect, really.
Awesome, and we'll put some links after this show. We can try to put them in here and help people find those resources. So I'm going to jump into the audience questions. Carol's going to leap in here, but I wanted to ask one audience question, which is from Nathan ASMR, myself, because this I've asked a lot of panels. This is a big theme, but from a scientific perspective, is ASMR sexual? Let's hear your thoughts on this.
So I get asked this a lot. And so the thing that I always make a distinction with is between ASMR as a term that is used to describe a particular kind of feeling, and ASMR videos, which are videos created sometimes with the intention or not of inducing this particular feeling. So there's a distinction between the videos and the feeling itself. And I think a lot of people who don't experience ASMR, when they perhaps watch a video, they see it as a very intimate experience, which it is. So they somehow mistake that for ASMR as the feeling being a sexual one. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion comes from. We did ask people this in our research. We asked them about their levels of sexual arousal. People say that ASMR is not a sexual feeling. We showed reductions in heart rate, which is exactly the opposite of what you would expect if ASMR was a sexual feeling. That's not to say that some people might not get aroused. Some people might get aroused by the videos, but that arousal is not ASMR as a feeling, at least as far as I understand it. We do have a sex lab in Essex, which involves looking at sexual arousal. So one thing I'm really keen to do when we can start testing again is to start to look at this in a more objective way. So we use specific instruments to look at sexual arousal in the genital areas. So we can actually test that more than just asking people, do you find this sexually arousing? So it's something that is on the list to look at.
Cloud, did you want? Oh, sorry. Did you want to say something, Rosie? No, go ahead.
No, please, Cloud. If Cloud has said something, yeah, sorry.
I was just clapping because that sounds exciting.
Oh. I was just going to add as well that what Julie was saying about it's sort of some people when they first experience it, confusing it for a sexual thing or a sexual experience. I think that's kind of how we got the term braingasm, which some people use to describe ASMR, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But just from a personal experience, this isn't sciencey, but I'm exclusively attracted to men, but I can only watch women do ASMR. So that just, just blows out of the water in my opinion, but that's just my, experience, but yeah.
Wow, that's fun. Cloud, did you want to add something there too? I think you said you just...
That's fascinating. Oh my gosh, En Vivo is opening. Hold on. Sorry.
No problem at all. So we have about 10 minutes left. I don't want to cut, if you wanted to say something there, I don't want to cut you short, but I just want to have time for the rest of these audience questions. Carol, did you want to jump in here and perhaps read off some of these? I think some of them were answered, but actually I want to just add, I think the conclusion here is just that there seems to be like a lot more research needs to be done. We need hard data. That's the important thing that distinguishes science from, science fiction, is that ultimately, once we get this data, it's clear that, we can have more answers. But clearly, you all need that support, and hopefully TingleCon can help you address some of that. So, Carol, why don't you take it away?
Sorry, I was coming from the shadows. Yes, I have some questions that have already been answered, which is amazing because you've been so thorough about your research. So I think that's really good. I had one, I think you answered this one, but I think just so we can get a little bit deeper into it, Thamkan was asking, do you have any recommendations for people who experience tingle immunity on a regular basis? Is there something that you know already? I know that you said something about not watching it that frequently, but I don't know if there's something else that you know about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the ASMR community probably knows more about this than we do as researchers, because you guys are experts in creating content and trying to overcome these things. So I would say I'm probably not best placed to answer that, because I just think I've been amazed by the amount of videos that give me tingles that I wasn't expecting to give me tingles. So things like fast ASMR. If somebody had said to me 5 years ago, oh, somebody speaking really quickly and doing loads of things with their hands will give you ASMR, I'd be like, nah, that never happens in real life, so it won't happen. But you know, I do watch those videos and unexpectedly get triggered. So I think you guys are the real experts in how we overcome it, but as researchers we need to look into it more.
Okay, thank you. That's a really good answer.
Oh, I think Rossi, did you want to say something? You had your hand raised there.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'll make it quick though, because I want to make time for other questions. But
Yeah, please.
Julia recommended something to me called, I don't know if I can swear, but bitchy ASMR, which is just, I never would have, you know, I never would have in a million years thought that I would have had ASMR to that, but I did give it a go and it worked. And you know, there are weeks sometimes where I don't have ASMR. So just really try something left field that you might not think you would experience. Just try and experiment, try a few different things. But Julia's kind of already said that, but just from my experience.
Yeah, I don't understand the bitchy ASMR thing. So I'm really interested in trying to understand this as a thing, because it feels so anti-ASMR to me, and it never triggers me. But it's so interesting to see all these different kinds of trends and what triggers different people. And you might not know your triggers until you encounter them.
That's me. I do bitchy ASMR.
But I also just want to highlight, because I think Klaus said it earlier, I do think there's that cross-cultural thing, because I know, for example, mukbang, which has a strong misophonic response. You go look at the origins of that in Asian culture, and you know that there is some cultural norms that play a role in that effect. So I do think that there's definitely clearly some, you know, way, you know, role that plays there. And clearly that probably needs to be studied more. Sorry to interrupt there.
No worries, that's fine. I was actually saying that I actually started doing bitchy ASMR, how you said, but it was because my viewers actually asked for it. I was like, how do you find this relaxing? I'm telling you that you're a piece of garbage. And they love it. And I think because I also do like a panel about comedy in ASMR, because I actually started growing when I started doing this type of videos, and people really find fascinating this way of like laughing and relaxing. And I mean, you get relaxed, don't you, when you laugh? It's a way of you know it more than I do. But they love it. They love the laughing and I don't know, getting relaxed, and then obviously at some point they fall asleep. But that's crazy. If you can like somehow look into it, please.
I might be one of them. I get relaxed with laughter. So for example, right now I'm having ASMR, so I'm about to zone out in a minute.
Crazy. Oh, that's so crazy. Oh God. Okay, thank you so much for the answers. Let me go to the next ones because I feel like I'm talking way too much. Sorry. Someone, I think it was Dragon Skull, asked something very interesting. He said, have anyone done a test to see how a neurodivergent person reacts to ASMR versus how a neurotypical person reacts?
It's a great question. The only study that I guess it depends how you define and measure neurodiversity, which is obviously a completely different, it's a really difficult topic anyway. The only study that I'm aware of that kind of looked at this was looking at autistic traits and relationship to ASMR, and they didn't find any particular association. We do know that sensory sensitivity is something that is experienced in, you know, lots of clinical conditions, and it seems to be something that underlies the ASMR experience. More recently, I've seen people suggest that ASMR can be used for stimming as a thing, and that for me is really intriguing because it's a potential another benefit of ASMR that I hadn't thought about. So it seems that people are using it in different ways. Cloud, do you want to say something about this? You probably know a lot more than me.
I don't think I know more than you, but I would agree that we can use ASMR for stimming because it's so liberating sometimes.
Sorry, I couldn't find that mute button. Thank you so much. That's very interesting. Because we have actually, I've noticed that we have many people from the spectrum in the community, and that's very interesting. Because I mean, I don't particularly am part of other communities as I am in this one, but I've noticed that there's a lot of people from the spectrum, and they really enjoy it and they benefit from it. So that's really something to look at. I think that's all because the rest ones. Oh wait, there's another one. What is true binaural versus percepted binaural? I think that's because Cloud said something.
Yeah, so binaural versus perceptive binaural. Okay, so binaural is the way we humans hear. So there's some acoustic cues. For example, if I'm listening to some sound that is coming from my right hand, the sound arrives first to this ear, then to this ear, right? And because energy, it arrives louder here than here because there's some distance. So from here to here, the sound loses some energy, right? So there's some acoustic cues, for example, the shape of the head, the shape of your shoulders, the density of your head, the shape of your ear, which is called the pinna. So there's a lot of elements that are considered for binaural sound to be binaural. And this is summed up in a term called head-related transfer function, or HRTF. I know it sounds very weird. You'll get used to it, hopefully, when I publish my research. So it's not only a stereo sound, which emulates, for example, having sound here and here, which emulates the distance between two ears, but it's much more complex than that to be binaural. It involves a complex algorithm that plays with the frequency content and with the intensity of different frequencies depending on the acoustics of your head. I don't know if that made sense. I hope so.
That sounds like those ASMR videos that says 8D, like ASMR in 8D. Have you seen those?
Yeah, there's not such a thing as 8D
I know,
unless
I
you're
read
like
about
an
it.
alien or something, I
Yeah.
guess. Because it's about dimensions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
because you can't see 8 dimensions.
Right?
I guess they might mean like 8 angles or something like that, but there's not such a thing as 8 dimensions unless you're like an alien or like an omni something being, because you know we can only perceive 3 dimensions and maybe 4th and 5th dimension if we're asleep or in a kind of hypnosis kind of trance, but there's not such a thing as 8D. Please don't do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of videos like that. Yeah.
Oh, you just get 8 mics. Come on, 8 mics. You get the ultra binaural. You know, that's the 8D. That's probably what they mean, at least. Well, you know what? I think was there any more audience questions there, Carol? I think that was the last one. Oh, let's do it. Yeah, Carol.
Yes.
Please.
Sorry, I forgot. I wanted to ask because of what Julia was saying earlier. Sorry. You said something about how your paper wasn't being accepted because they were like, oh, what is this? What are you talking about? So it took you like 4 years to actually get it published. So I wanted to ask, do you feel the situation is changing? Because in the community, we see in ads, in Instagram, we see it on TV and the Super Bowl and all things like that. But I don't know if from like a serious background, are they taking it more seriously?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think the answer is yes, that they are. And I think it's really hard when you first start, when there's nothing published on a topic, because we basically got rejections from everywhere that we sent this paper, because people were just saying that it wasn't real, it wasn't a real thing. And science is a bit weird because, at least in psychology, in the journals that we submit to, you have two people and an editor reviewing your work. And so whether you know what changes you get and whether something gets accepted really just depends on two people. So having said that, the more people that are doing ASMR research, the easier it is. So for example, I review a lot of papers on ASMR, and I don't need convincing that it's a real thing, right? Because I know, so you've got past that barrier. So I think it's starting to snowball a bit, and papers are coming out more readily, which is great, and it's brilliant. The main thing now that is the difficulty is convincing funders. So people that I've tried to ask for money to do ASMR research, that I've not had any success so far with that. So that's another battle, I think, but we'll get there.
Well, I think as ASMR grows, and a TinkleCon is another representation of that growth, I think, I do believe and I hope that comes to fruition. So if anyone is out there watching and wants to learn more, of course, we have the ASMR Network. I just want to say thank you so much, Julia, Rossi, and Clau. I hope people will take the time to go follow you on Twitter, on Instagram. We can put the links in the chat there. And again, the research is out. There's some research is out there. We definitely need a lot more. We need your support for that. So, but that all said, thank you so much for your time.